Why? This monument stands in the village of Kapustinci, Kyiv region, a monument to fellow villagers, heroes of the struggle for the establishment and strengthening of Soviet power in Ukraine. Within 10 turbulent years of that struggle, 12 heroes died. Nearby, there is a monument to fellow villagers who died for the liberation of Ukrainian land from the Nazis. Within 4 years, 170 residents of this village laid down their lives on battlefields of the Great War. They sacrificed their lives so that their mothers, their children, and all their loved ones would live on. The glory of the heroes will never fade into the twilight. Such memorials stand in villages all across Ukraine. In this village, there is also a monument to victims of the Holodomor 1932-33. Some names of children victims of the Holodomor were known. Others were not. That's why this tombstone just says 3 children, 4 children, and again 3 children, then another 2, another 5, and 2 more, and another 5. Whole extended families died out. 500 days, 1,124 victims. And that is in one little village alone. In September of 1941, German troops besieged Leningrad. Hitler was determined to destroy the cradle of the October Revolution, to wipe it off the face of the earth. From November of 1941, when hunger set in among the besieged, until October of 1942, when basic food supplies were restored, 641,803 residents of Leningrad died. Their names are indelibly engraved on the granite. Famine and bombs could not break the spirit of the besieged. 25 to 250 grams of bread rations, and were still fighting on against the crazed Nazi invaders. What kept them going was their iron will and the support of all Soviet people. They were inspired by the resounding voice of Levitan, a legendary radio announcer. The famous Claudia Shulzhenko sang her songs for them, and the great Shostakovich composed his immortal Seven. In 1933, in Ukraine, there was no road of life. The circle of death had closed in on this land in 1932, and that was fully legitimized by the regime.
Це документ про встановлення додаткових заходів по посиленню кордонів навколо України. Це документ від січня 1932 року. Друге, Ще в 1931 році за постановою ЦК на Україні споряджається велика група фахівців, яким ставляться завдання обслідувати всі припортові елеватори, самі порти. І ця група напрацьовує цілу низку заходів по розширенню портів і по будівництві нових елеваторів. Тобто Голодомор готувався, оцей збір зерна.
In 1932, People's Commissar in charge of transportation routes of the USSR, Andrei Andreev, issued a secret order prohibiting Ukrainian peasants from leaving the territory of Ukraine. This and other similar documents provided legal grounds for further related actions of the Soviet government. Those who tried to bring any kind of food into Ukraine faced total dispossession. Those who attempted to flee from famine were sent back to Ukraine to die where they belonged. Meanwhile, people were getting too weak to run for their life. Besides, there was no way to flee the country. Along the borders, there were the so-called barrage squads, ostensibly deployed either to conduct field exercises or to help collective farmers harvest the crops. So the situation amounted to what in the years of war against the Nazis was captured in the famous phrase addressed to the defenders of the capital: Russia is large, but we have nowhere to retreat. Behind us is Moscow. Resolutions of the Communist Party and government provided a legal basis for unconditional confiscation of grain.
Мы от жизни слово дали, что пройдем сквозь мрак и лед. Шлем привет, товарищ Сталин, дома будем через год.
That made it possible to increase Soviet grain exports by dozens of times. The export of grain seized from starving Ukrainian peasants was channeled through Ukraine's ports. These are documents from the Odessa archives. Monthly targets of grain export: January, February, March. Telegrams carrying orders from Moscow. Most of the documents are written in longhand, in single copies, and all of them carry a handwritten security specification, classified, which raises the status of these seemingly ordinary trade documents to the level of state secrets. And this is an inventory of ships used to export grain. Name, load weight, 8,000 tons, 7,000 tons, 6,000 tons, and so on, according to the list. Analysis of the reports on grain deliveries to foreign ports. Consigner, destination. As grain kept being shipped off, more and more people were dying. Overall, the grain export statistics in millions of metric centners looked like this. The largest amount of grain was exported from 1930 to 1932. In 1932, where the most severe of Holodomors was only beginning, the grain export was 20-fold larger than in 1929, before the full-scale collectivization. Later, exports dropped sharply, as there wasn't much left to export. Meanwhile, demographics looked like this. Before 1931, Ukraine's annual birth rate exceeded 1 million. In 1933, it dropped lower than half of that. The natural death rate was at the level of statistical average and even decreasing. But that wasn't meant to last. The figure of 4.5 million is a very conservative estimate, made in the spirit of what is now referred to as political correctness.
У нас в первую очередь отличается народ тем, что никак не могут до конца ответить на вопрос, какая цена вопроса. Да? Вот я считаю, что если один человек гибнет по дороге к решению вопроса, это уже неправильно. И так любой цивилизованный человек должен считать. Поэтому в первую очередь, как вам сказать, плоскость должна быть немножко другая рассмотрение. Да, это колоссальная историческая трагедия, в первую очередь уничтожившая колоссальный людской ресурс. Может быть, остановившая Украину, там, может, это была бы уже там самая продвинутая какая-то в науке, в технике, где угодно государственном мире. Мы же не знаем, кого убили эти люди.
An overall estimate indicates that the Soviet authorities valued one human life at 3 tons of grain. At that time, the world market price of 1 ton of grain averaged about $30. So when each famine killed Ukrainian, the Kremlin rulers made some $90 of commercial gain. Not too much of a profit, but if you multiply it by millions, it makes a difference. Economy of scale. That was a massive food-for-death operation. Champions of confiscation drive were handsomely rewarded, and the top achievers received top governmental awards. This document is a case in point. It is a submission for award, saying, on the occasion of the 15th anniversary of the state monopoly on foreign trade in Ukraine and overachievement of targets set, comrades such and such are considered worthy of being awarded Orders of the Red Banner of Labor. Good job.
Всякій дії передує думка, ідея. Ідея була роздушити Україну і зберегти Російську імперію у великому тому складі, в якому вона була, і не допустити, щоб Україна вирвалася із Російської імперії. Ось ідея. Хто здійснював на практиці цю ідею? Бо це був стимул. А ту ідею здійснювали ось люди, які тоді керували імперією. Їхній список є, їхні прізвища є. Ці прізвища можна назвати.
What is really crucial is to understand what caused the crime and what made it possible. It's crucial to understand what turns people into ruthless monsters. That is why there should be a trial by the world's court of justice. But for that trial to take place, a case should be made, and evidence of the crime should be provided to the fullest extent possible. And as far as credibility goes, seeing is believing. Especially as in the years of the Holodomor, the outside world could hardly see or hear what was really going on in the famine-hit areas, which were one huge scene of crime. In 1969, the Soviet Cinema Chronicle was published. Every year, the much-lauded Soviet School of Documentary Cinematography churned out dozens of whitewash films. 1931, 1932, industrialization, the great construction of Dnipro gas power station, the progress of mechanization, etc. Life in the country of triumphant Bolshevism received comprehensive and manifestly upbeat coverage. But in 1933, only one documentary saw the light of day. It had a resounding title, The Bolshevik. Movie makers didn't film anything else, obviously fearing that they could accidentally shoot something they were not supposed to. 1934, more films were made, like this one about the happy life of coal miners. There also was another documentary, The Harvest Festival. As you can see, that one was in English. A film of the new life, of fruitful labor, of the harvest festival of the collective farms, the kolkhozes. Gorgeous landscapes of the beautiful country. And the comment, where the Dnieper flows through a flowering land, this Soviet Ukraine. A sight for sore eyes. Shiningly clean and tidy cows grazing on lush pastures. This bull must be really lucky. The whole picture is the epitome of animal welfare. The cows are well fed and happy. Holland just pales in comparison. And the milkmaids are also so happy and good-looking. Oh, pretty Ukrainian girls. Shining streams of fresh, top-quality milk filling the buckets to the brims. Gorgeous milk. And how tasty was the butter made from that milk. Definitely not worse than that made in Holland. And this piglet could easily star in the Babe movie. Remember the old children's rhyme, Old MacDonald had a farm. But if poor old MacDonald saw this farm, he would be green with envy. And there is so much grain, more than enough, huge export potential. That will shut up those who slander the happy country of Soviets. The whole world will see that the Soviet Union is flourishing. And that's exactly what we need. Seeing is believing. Let them see it all and relax. In the Chronicle, this film is dated 1936. In fact, it was made earlier. Note the date of this newspaper, which was printed right out in the field and delivered by young pioneers to various workplaces. It wasn't without a reason that the leader of world proletariat Vladimir Lenin said, "Of all the arts, the cinema is the most important for us." Thus, civilized countries had no qualms about buying Ukrainian grain, as judging from that documentary, Ukraine had plenty to spare. Collective farmers used to read those propaganda leaflets during their lunch breaks, in field canteens, after proper three-course meals of gorgeous Ukrainian borscht, meat with potatoes, and pancakes with sour cream. Then they would sing some lovely Ukrainian songs to raise their working spirits and get back to the fields. The film Harvest Festival provided the leaders of civilized countries with a convenient opportunity to see nothing but prosperity in Ukraine, and therefore to accept Ukrainian grain with a clear conscience. The film was made up to high professional standards, and its message rang loud and clear. Under Tsarism, these fields never yielded such bountiful crops of wheat. True, such collective farms did exist, as a form of window dressing. There's an interesting coincidence of historic events. In 1929, the First World Economic Crisis began, the Great Depression. In 1934, it came to an end, and 30 leading countries of the world invited the Soviet Union to join the League of Nations. as if to thank the country for being a huge market for their heavy machinery and an exporter of cheap grain. Thus, the world adopted the attitude, see no evil, hear no evil. Speaking at the 17th Congress of the Soviet Bolshevik Party, the top Red officer Clement Voroshilov stated clearly, "We consciously opted for the famine because we needed grain. But those who were victims of the famine were only the non-working elements and kulaks. Just think about it. We consciously opted for famine because we needed grain." But those words fell on deaf ears of the world community. This is an ancient Ukrainian town of Ostrigh. A very special place which has played a prominent role in the history and culture of our country. Here, the first Ukrainian books were printed, and the first students studied at the first Ukrainian academy. Back in 1933, Ostrigh was Polish territory. This river, Vilia, marked the Soviet-Polish border. Winding its way through this land, this narrow strip of water was an insurmountable divide between two worlds. On the other side of the river, beyond those reeds, there was a totally different life.
Кордон, значить, Остріг був прикордонною зоною. А річка, яка розділяє Остріг на дві частини Вілля, визначала ще більш прикордонну дільницю, яким було, власне, нове місто. Ми ходили, наприклад, на границю гуляти, могли навіть з приграничної полоси квіти рвати. Пам'ятаю такий випадок, коли в 1935 році, після смерті Пілсудського, брали з границі землю, проводили мітинг на границі і цю землю везли на могилу, яка була у Пілсудському насипана в Кракові. От, власне, ми, як школярі, ходили туди, і тоді ми бачили радянських цих пограничників, бо границя мала ж багато більшу охорону, і вони сиділи там на деревах в лісі, в своїх будьонках, і ми там на них спозирали.
A little further into Ukraine's territory, some 10 kilometers from the river, there was one more dividing line, drawn by Stalin right in those years. Apart from other reasons, it was meant to hide the grim Soviet reality behind a solid iron curtain. But was it possible? Anguished cries pierced even those slabs of concrete. That's why the cover-up operation was launched to drown those cries in deafening fanfare.
Кількох парубків із-за Збруча перейшли нелегально через Збруч і в селі, значить, пішли наймитами поміж люди. Та у вас тут рай, у вас тут небо, каже. От, дивіться, каже. Прийшли до церкви, виходять, станете з собою, говорите. Більший круг, менший круг, каже, папіроси курять, запрошують себе в гостину, один другого ходить, каже, що ж може бути краще? Хліб є, до хліба є, розумієте, свобідно можна і поговорити, і поспівати, і так далі, розумієте. Чому, каже, чому ви маєте не годувати своїм положенням? А в нас, каже, того не можна. Наприклад, заспівав, наприклад, прийшов до Кравця один із тих, і каже, а парубок, мій друг такий, Федь Будник, заспівав, щось думи мої, щось думи мої. А він каже, а у вас хіба можна то співати? А каже, та що можна, от одна Шевченкова пісня, чому ж не можна співати? А в нас, каже, то його, і того остерігаюся. Взагалі, який-небудь натяг патріотизму із приватної особи на сцені, на показ, то могло бути, то для пропаганди зовнішньої. Але внутрі хотіли сказати, щоб всі сказати, або мовчали, або хвалили владу, більш нічого.
Ukrainians abroad were well aware of what was going on in the land of their forefathers and did their utmost to help.
Тільки як дійшли слухи, що на великій Україні наші брати українці голодують, що там матері не мають хліба дати дітям, не мають в грудях покорму для грудних діточок. Вона зразу почала агітувати, щоб збирати пожертвування продуктами для голодуючих на великій Україні. Вона їздила по селах, ходила пішки де ближче, а так їздила фірою, кіньми. І збирала людей, і люди дуже прислухалися, дуже співчували всі голодуючим. І дуже щедро люди жертвували збіжжям, хто пшеницею, хто що мав, для голодуючих. І було зібрано багато збіжжя, але як вдалися до Львівського консульства Радянського Союзу, то там заперечили, що на великій Україні ніякого голоду нема, і наші люди з великим жалем і сумом шкодували, що не можуть допомогти нічим своїм однокровним українцям на великій Україні.
У 33 році, як такий, був заступник консула Маїлов. І Микола Лемик, мій ровесник з 15-го року, якраз закінчив гімназію, розумієте, і прийшов до нього з револьвером, розумієте. Значить, хотів самого консула бачити, а то часто був тільки заступник, зам. І він тоді, розумієте, щось там говорив, і той до нього встрілив і вбив його. За Голодомор в Україні. За Голодомор в Україні вбив його так. Так і казав на суді. То є, сказати би, протест на весь світ проти Голодомору в Україні. Я не жалую свого життя, щоб дати світу, ви розумієте, український народ протестує проти того. Буде у своїх поодиноких, сказати би, очайдушних членах. Хлопець 18 літ, розумієте чи ні? Юнак.
The world could afford turning a blind eye to the atrocities of Holodomor because the cover-up operation made it possible to focus on what was being dished out by the skillful Soviet propaganda. One of the examples was a purported national renaissance of Ukraine. It was right in those years that another component of the cover-up operation was being implemented. In the town of Kanyiv, the construction of Taras Shevchenko Museum was started. The building design was approved, the hills of the Dnipro bank reshaped, and a freight elevator built. As it was the case with all high-profile Soviet projects, the museum construction was massively hyped up. Besides, construction workers were given meals.
А як уже стали робити, як музей відкрився, то тоді там стали варити таку, вроді як затірка, розумієте? Тільки що це ж моя сестра там робила, її взяли варити той. І одна була аж із Бобриці з села. То була, вважається, вже поварша. Ну, а та поварша, та борошно крала. Понімаєте, за те, що давали заколотити вже затірку людям, то вона візьме та набере трохи та сховає, та несе своїм вже там дітям чи сім'я, яка була. А сестра моя та не знала, Саша її було звуть. Не знала цього, а так вона попросила її, а той, що я, каже, ляжу та засну трохи, ця та поварша, а ти будеш, каже, варити. Ну, то вона там, не знаю, чи такий котел був, чи що вони варили, бо там вже було вже людей чимало. Ну, то вона не знала, що вона надбирає, а та не надібрала, а та задала, а вона собі вже затопила, то воно топилося, там стала вода кипіти, вона стала сипати, та те все борошно висипала, а воно стало густе, а вона не знала, що робити, та збудила її, каже, вставай, бо я нічого не зроблю, воно густе, я ж не подужаю помішати. А вона це все висипала, вона каже, висипала, ти ж не сказала мені, то я висипала ж усе, я ж думаю, що треба якої порції якої дають, значить таку й сипать. А вона тоді схватилася, що робить, а тут уже от на обіді тимуть.
Pulled by the promise of food, famine survivors from neighboring villages started trickling into the area as caravans kept bringing building materials to Tarasova Hora, the hill bearing the poet's name. Such ox carts, for instance, were used for carrying stones. And the previous year...
Я один раз йшла, то жив так на горі один. 3 їх було парубки, і всі 3 померли. І один я йду, аж він лежить. Я так глянула на його, ой, Боже ж мій, як ще було його звуче. Забула, як його було і звуть, вже якось так чудно було звуть. А та його тоді забрали та під горою там і закопали.
І в Каневі було, йдемо хліба просить по Каневі. То лежить, глядить боком там, вже готова людина. Туди далі пройшов, ніхто їх не вбирав, ніхто не зачіпав їх, не знаю, хто їх вже вбирав, то я їх не буду вам говорити. Ну йдеш, то переступиш, йдеш, і як нікому не треба вони будуть. Люди падали, як мухи.
The built museum became a model of Soviet culture. The culture, which, as Stalin aptly put it, was national by form and socialist by content. The museum profusely showcased achievements of the Soviet political system, which Soviet historians and literary critics maintained was exactly what the poet had always aspired and fought for. Unscrupulous scholars ascertained beyond reasonable doubt that the great Kobzar had been an ardent revolutionary democrat. The museum was decorated with highly artistic painted and sculptured images of best friends of the Ukrainian people, Lenin, Stalin, Molotov, and others. Dig my grave and raise my barrow by the Dnieper side. In Ukraine, my own land, a fair land and wide, I will lie and watch the cornfields, listen through the years to the river voices roaring, roaring in my ears. Bury me, be done with me, rise and break your chains. And buried he was, but the chains remained unbroken. That was the way Ukraine flourished in care of the loving Big Brother. With the window dressing exercise well underway, everything was ready for launching another phase of the cover-up operation. In 1934, amid great fanfare, the government of Soviet Ukraine moved from the proletarian city of Kharkiv to the ancient cradle of 3 fraternal nations, the holy city of Kyiv. By that time, it was already safe for the regime, ideologically and otherwise. Because the sacredness of the holy cradle, just like that of the whole Soviet state, had been thoroughly purged of undesirable architectural vestiges of harmful religious legacy. Most of the churches had been demolished or had their crosses and bells pulled down and melted into instruments of socialist construction tools, tractors, tanks, cannons, and such like. Areas areas had been cleared for the construction of grandiose architectural ensembles. Ancient Kiev was to be given a major makeover. There were 3 projects for the construction of a government quarter, which was supposed to become a grand monument to the triumph of Bolshevism. The first project was to be set in Pechersk district, in the neighborhood of modern Square of Glory, on the burial site of those who had laid down their lives in the War of 1812. The 2 options of the second project envisioned pulling down the Philharmonic's building and St. Vladimir Hill. The third project was set in St. Michael Square. That required pulling down St. Sophia and gold-domed St. Michael cathedrals. It was only natural that the third project was chosen and executed, albeit partially. St. Michael Cathedral was razed to the ground, but demolition of St. Sophia was prevented by the French as a token of their good memory of Anna, a queen of France and daughter of Yaroslav the Wise. The moral atmosphere of Soviet Ukraine was also cleaned of all evil and repugnant bourgeois and nationalistic elements. In the course of high-profile show trials, like those of the Industrial Party, Ukraine's Liberation League and others, almost all Ukrainian intellectuals were exterminated. In 1933 alone, about 125,000 dissidents were arrested and neutralized. Under the watchful eye of Kaganovich, Ukraine's Communist Party was also subjected to purges. Secretary of the Bolshevik Central Committee of the Soviet Union, Kaganovich knew who had to be purged, as he had spent about 4 years as head of the party's Central Committee of his native Ukraine.
Есть опасная группа, самая опасная. Он и не враг, он и не вредитель, сочувствующий вредитель. Есть сочувствующие коммунистам, а есть сочувствующие вредителям. Он шепчет, он создает туман, он разлагает людей, он сюсюкает направо и налево для того, чтобы подрывать. Больше того, он сидит в кабинете, он даже работает вроде, дает распоряжение, но он дает распоряжение так по чайной ложечке.
The Purge mission cleared the way for the process of turning the ordinary human being, Homo sapiens, into the person of communist future, Homo Sovieticus. In fact, creating this species of builders of communism was regarded by the Soviet regime as a top priority. The big idea was to make sure that only the new type of people were allowed to live under communism. Besides, since the very beginning of communist fight against the dark past, the regime had gained a wealth of experience in remolding people accordingly. It was those remolded by the Bolshevik ideology that the domestic component of the cover-up operation was designed for. That target audience proved to be very responsive.
Коммунистам нужны были, так сказать, равенство в нищете, равенство в едином, так сказать, рабском этом порыве. И я думаю, что Украина не очень вписывалась в эту картину. И вот дух такой свободолюбивой Украины, он как бы не вписывался в эту картину. Поэтому я думаю, что, если заметили, террористы, вообще даже сейчас, вот, они сразу, когда захватывают там самолет или страну или что-то, они ищут самую сильную жертву. Они пытаются как бы дестабилизировать ситуацию чем? Видя, кто самый сильный, они пытаются этого сильного сразу там убить или уничтожить, или показать на его примере остальным, чтобы их деморализовать. Я думаю, что Украина была таким сильным звеном, с таким, знаете, которого коммунисты опасались, которым они до конца не могли просчитать, что делать. Я думаю, что это удар был, причем он же шел по крестьянству, по самому, так сказать, такому классу привязанному к земле, к своей земле, к традициям. Я думаю, что это было сознательно.
Thank God, at that time, there still existed Ukrainian territories which were not subject to the Soviet power. People living there were not affected by the cover-up operation.
Нещодавно мені попався такий календар. Називався він на 1912 рік, називався він «Весь Київ в кармані». Там, значить, були адреса всіх магазинів київських, чим вони тільки не торгували. Так я, от, гортаючи цей календар, прийшла до висновку, що якби радянська влада цього не знищила, я собі не уявляю, яка багата була б ця країна.
Тут, крім нашої величезної трагедії, тут ще є, ну, знаєте, титанічний талант, здібність виживати. Ось, адже незважаючи на те, українська нація вижила, і вона тепер поступово повертається до своїх духовних джерел, правда, з болями, з труднощами, з всякими, знаєте, великими проблемами, але тим не менше ми вижили, ми пережили, ми залишилися нацією і маємо шанси тепер, здобувши вже незалежність, маємо шанси розвиватися, повертатися до своїх духовних джерел і стати справді нормальною європейською нацією.
Even among Ukrainians, there is no unanimity on this issue. Still loud are voices of those who dismiss the evidence of engineered famines as political speculation. Ukraine's present Communist Party Secretariat, in no uncertain terms, as befits Bolsheviks, refused to give us an interview for this film, saying that their view of the matter is well and widely known as it is, so we thought it would be appropriate to recap it. There was famine, which affected not only Ukraine, but also vast southern regions of Russia. It was caused by poor harvest and large exports of grain to Europe. The number of victims was 700,000 and not 10 million people.
Уже сьогодні відкриті стільки архівів, що і я часто дискутував, будучи депутатом з комуністами. Ну, я казав йому, у вас же ж є, я знаю вас, і ваші біографії по одній, по дві вищі освіти. Ну чому ж ви не вчитаєтесь? Адже є документи. Це не є якесь щось голослівне. Просто люди не хочуть навіть вірити ні документам, нікому. Вони якось живуть. У мене так іноді складалося враження, що в них, ну, іначе якесь щеплення їм зроблене оцією ленінською ідеологією, отак, як їх навчили старих комуністичних лозунгів, так і вони ними живуть. Не хочуть визнавати правди, аналізувати, думати. Для того, напевно, Бог нам дав розум, щоб ми думали, зважували, робили висновки. В них того немає. Але я завжди мав один єдиний аргумент в різних дискусіях з представниками комуністичної партії. Я завжди їх питав, чи є в них в їхній ідеології поняття гріха, а відповідно і моралі. Вони не могли відповісти на це.
It's like they're still living in another country, apart from their nation, whose soul appeals to the memory of the past. Communists admit that the famine was made by the then leadership of the Communist Party and state, but they protest against what they call Pharisaic use of those events as a political weapon. While distancing themselves from the criminal legacy, they refuse to recant what made the crime possible in the first place, the Bolshevik ideology. It should be reiterated, it's not a matter of personalities. We understand only too well that punishing individual culprits the way they deserve is impossible, not least because they are already beyond the reach of earthly court of justice, even though their cause lives on. Besides, it's not punishment that we seek. Our goal is to bring closer the prospect of trial, in the course of which, just like it was the case with Nuremberg, the whole world can see a fairly complete picture of the crime. And so that this film, among millions of other pieces of incriminating evidence, make a contribution in producing a composite effect of those capable of repeating this kind of atrocity. The following are common features of potential criminals. They are fanatically and unreservedly convinced that they are the only possessors of ultimate truth. They categorically divide people into superior and inferior along the lines of ethnicity, race, religion, social class, or other characteristics. They treat the inferior as disposable material, being deeply convinced that the lives and possessions of the inferior can be disposed of in whatever way the superior see fit. They follow the principle, the end we seek justifies any means. They are obsessed with the idea of global power. They may belong to different political parties, groups, or communities, and espouse different kinds of isms. They, like people in general, can manifest themselves in various ways, shapes and forms. But all of them are characterized with this set of features, which indicate that under certain circumstances, this kind of people are apt to do inhuman things. They must be stopped before it is too late. But it's not people and not even ideologies that we should fight against. It's crucial that we prevent circumstances under which they may thrive. Sounds naive, but other options lead to a repeat of history. There are many monuments in Ukraine, like this one, which was erected in the village of Zazimye, near Kyiv, in memory of 99 Red Army servicemen. The history behind it is as follows. A food confiscation detachment of 100 troops came into the village and set about their confiscation business. Local peasants refused to put up with it and killed all of them except one, who managed to escape and returned with a backup squad, which finished the job in one fell swoop. Rebel leaders were executed, and in memory of the killed robber soldiers, the monument was erected. However controversial, the monument does serve a good purpose, like all other monuments of this kind, like the one to the renowned Soviet statesman Stanislav Kosyor, and Vladimir Lenin, the leader of world proletariat, and all other so-called ardent Bolsheviks. All those monuments should be preserved, so that Ukrainians remember all their history and understand who was who in it, so that nobody can ever dismiss the outcry of pain and sorrow as political speculation, so that everyone should finally understand that as long as there are rulers who view people as raw material, as inputs, as cogs in the machine for realizing political ideas, however well-sounding, nobody will be safeguarded against tragic repetitions of history, neither in Ukraine nor anywhere else in the world. People, be vigilant. When one human being dies, a whole world disappears. When millions of people vanish into an abyss, whole galaxies perish. And if you forget for whom the bell tolls, it will toll for you and your children.